All right, part two of this episode. Last episode we did the picks 1 to 16. We're going to jump right back into it here and start at pick 17. Oh, I think I actually messed up my screenshot. Do you have it up on yours what pick 17 was? I missed
It's Mike Root.
Oh, right.
Angels taking Mike Root.
Yeah, so the Angels nabbed Rue here. The auto draft, I guess he was a little busy in real life, but not a bad guy to have auto drafted to your team. One of the most advanced bats in the draft. Not a ton to talk about his profile, just pretty much a developed college guy with a big boomstick. Yet
Mm-hmm.
another guy, like we mentioned last episode, with 80 contacts, 60 power. Has been a handful of them in this draft. Doesn't play a premium defensive position, but makes up for it with quite high currents.
Yeah, I mean he's a very advanced college bat. 80 contacts, 65 home run power, which it's gonna first base. The bat's gonna have to carry him, but it probably should, and he's pretty advanced as you said. Another one of these guys who would be a first round pick, a top 5 pick in most classes. I think he's in that. His current uh, projections are in that like Leva, Mike Williams sort of category. Of what they were when they were drafted. So it speaks to just how good this draft class is that he's going 17th overall.
Yeah, exactly. Like the 80s and all the 60s, that's just incredible. Like that screams like 140 OPS plus and stuff. And I'd say top
Mm-hmm.
three most pro-ready player in this draft class with currents. So it wouldn't surprise me one bit if he's in the majors by 23 if everything goes well. So, uh, you don't love taking first baseman in the first round unless their bat's huge, and his is. So you can see why
Yep.
everyone valued him so high, the computer and us especially. Next up, we had back to my pick. I had my compensation pick here of not signing my first rounder last year, and I went the safe route again. I was happy to take another college guy. This guy is a really high level shortstop, 70 range, 65 arm with 60 turn double play plus air. Just doesn't have a ton of eye, which was one thing I was a little hesitant on. But I just, at the end of the day, couldn't pass up a guy that plays that good a defense with 70 hit stick and such high currents. Just a pretty safe pick for me. Do you have a similar profile with your scout?
Yeah, I mean he's kind of like he's like Radford, right? He's not a huge upside guy, but it's a very high floor player who can pretty much play defensively anywhere. I think. Um, it sounds like you're going to make him a shortstop, which worked for the 70 range that he's got with the 65 arm and 60 turn double play. So again, along with Radford, these two should be kind of the left side of your infield for the next 5-6 years when they make the majors, and it should be pretty close.
Yeah, it's exactly my thought process. I was pretty excited for that. I have a pretty good core of second baseman in my minors too, so starting to get this infield looking a little better. And yeah, sometimes the shortstop don't look like the sexiest of picks compared to the other guys that have like 60 power and 55 eye and all those things. But at the end of the day, you just can't survive as a high level team without good shortstops. And it's really hard to come by them. You can get lucky, like 1 in a 50 chance, and get like a scouting discovery, but you just kind of got to overdraft the guys that have decent bats, that have really good defense, and just hope the bats get a little better. Yeah, so like I said, you don't see some of the crazy offensive ratings of some of these other guys, but you just can't usually go wrong with this shortstop with plus plus defense and a 70 contact rating. So I was just pretty happy with jumping in with that pick there. Another college guy. Next pick, I really liked. The Chicago Cubs at 19. They picked Justin Pride, but not nearly as risky in my opinion as some of these other high school guys have gone. Not quite the ceiling of some of those top 10 picks, the high school guys, the third baseman Kitchens and Fleece, but Pride's one of the safer high school picks you'll ever see with such high currents. Really like this profile. Probably a pretty solid second base, potential first base guy. Do you like that? Do you have the same 40-80 contact on him? That's really high for my scout.
Yeah, I have the same thing. 40-80 contact, 30-60 home run power. Potential for everything to be at least 50 across the board offensively. Um, only the 55 range, so he's limited to probably second base with the 55 range and 45 arm, but should be pretty good there. And it's always nice to have the guy with the leader personality, which just adds to that locker room. So I think it's like you said, it's a pretty good pick and a pretty safe pick for a high school guy with his currents and only at 1.1 million. To get a guy like that at 19 overall is pretty good value.
Yeah, just a lot of check marks, kind of like we talked about with Nanny, where he just kind of checks almost every box. Pretty much the same thing with Pride. You just hope that really comes down with he can stick at second base, because clearly the bat should be good enough to be a really good hitter. It's just, and it probably could survive first base if it had to. Still really good ratings, but he could be a really high level player if he can stick at second base. If his range stays at 55 and doesn't get any lower, you won't ever be like a Gold Glove second baseman, but that profile right now, he could definitely survive at second base and be pretty solid. So yeah, it will just be really interesting. But I think that's a guy that you could really see fly through the minors. Just very, very rare to have a high school bat that can play the middle of the infield that has 40, 80 contacts. Kind of like we talked about with Nuncino earlier. So really, really high
Yep.
upside guy there for sure. Next up, we have Mike Cisco. Mike Cisco is a outfielder that went to Washington. Another gigantic bat here, kind of similar profile to a guy that went a few picks ago, the first baseman Mike Rue, where this guy is a corner bat, but also has the crazy high currents.
Yeah, I mean it's just another one of those big bats, like you said. Um, Similar to I think it was Danny Salva. No, no, sorry, someone before who I compared to Bryce Harper, and he's kind of a light version of that guy. I just don't remember who it was, but yeah,
Oh
I mean
yeah,
the current's
Kitchens,
already
I think.
pretty good. Yeah, Kitchens, that's right. So he's just kind of a baby version of Kitchens. Defensively, he's not going to provide you much value. I think he's just a borderline left fielder at best. But 75 contact, 65 power with the 55 eye is a pretty good combination. Should give you another guy who gives you like a 130 to 140 OPS plus. Um, is durable. The price is only $1 million, and he's pretty well developed. I have him at 40 contact already. His gap power is already maxed out at 55 for me and 35 home run power. So it's a pretty safe pick, even if the ceiling's not that high because of lacking just defensive versatility. Which should be a pretty good bat in the near future for Washington.
Yeah, and while you're talking there, I was going over on my screen. I just looked at the OSA rankings, which are sky high, and I don't put a ton of stock into that compared to my scout because obviously the scout is a little more accurate when they're focusing on guys with the more accurate report. But it's always a good sign when the OSA is higher than your scout because you got to think even if you kind of weigh it like 90-10 or 80-20, it's definitely obviously better than having OSA lower on it. So it's just another kind of nice addition. The fact that OSA thinks he has 75 contact and 75 power, so clearly the bat is pretty beastly. Next up, we have another Minnesota Twins pick. We mentioned earlier their strategy going with the very, very high upside pick early on at 7 overall, the top high school arm in the draft, Jim Madden. And then what do they do at this pick? They go with the highest upside college arm. This is a fascinating strategy, and even if just one of these guys hits, it's going to be really exciting. What do you think about O'Neill? There's a lot to look at this profile, ton of stuff to go over.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very very interesting profile, right? He might be like he's like sort of like AJ Cackley, the shortstop who went third overall, where he might be kind of a top five pick if his personality was better. He does have the high intelligence to lean on, but low work ethic, low loyalty, high greed, low leadership. It's kind of a very iffy personality. So, but you're getting some extreme upside here with it. But and he's a college arm, so he's already pretty well developed with the potential for 5 pitches of 55 or better, headlined by a 70 sinker. So and he's lefty, which is always a nice addition. But that personality lends to some downside. But Minnesota's going for it here with these pitchers. I know Niles mentioned it in the chat. Kind of took the 2 best pitchers off the board, and I would tend to agree. Even if each of them have some serious red flags.
Yeah, it's just a crazy sky high offensive profile, or sorry, pitching profile from the top end. Like you just don't get too many lefties that have 5 pitches that are that high rated. So you just got to live with the low mentals there and just hope that he fits in with a nice organization there. Nice fit. Like there's a lot of top teams in the AL there that has a lot of good lefty bats. Montreal comes to mind and Milwaukee. So having an ace type talent that can come in there as a lefty and help you out and really minimize the home runs. There's just a ton to love about that upside. So we'll see how he develops. And yeah, I think you take especially with those really bad mentals, it's a little better when they're college and, like you said, they're already pretty developed.
Yeah.
Because I think it hinders the high school guys a little more. Say they have 5, 6 years in the minors to develop the low work ethic, but if he's already 65% of the way to his potentials, the low work ethic I don't think kills you quite as much. So I just love that strategy though of going all in with those pitchers. It's gonna be really interesting to see who does better, O'Neill or Madden. I'm definitely gonna be watching that over the next few years for sure.
Yep.
Next up is Ben Herring. Really, the first thing that stands out when I look at this profile is a lot of blue. I just see blue. I see 5 blue tools, almost 6 there with a range. Big upside there, a little raw. That's where you get the later. Once you get later in this first round here, you don't get quite the high currents, but still get the sky high upside with Ben Herring. Going to Pittsburgh, who really knows how to develop outfielders.
Yeah, I mean it's a high school bat, and he's pretty raw. Everything currently is 30 or lower, including 25 contact, but nothing is 20, which is nice to have. But I have as a 70 contact, 65 home run power with the 65 range. So he's a guy who could probably play center field if he needed to. High work ethic, which is nice, always good out of the high school guys, and 70 speed. So it's potentially here to be another 5-tool talent in center field for as you said, a Pittsburgh team that really knows how to develop guys.
Yeah, and I remember saying to another buddy a little while back during the draft, kind of a lot of shades of Byron Buxton, what he would have looked like in real life at that time. Buxton was also a really
Mhm.
raw hit tool. It took a lot of years to develop with crazy power, contact, bat speed, and athleticism. Buxton obviously was pretty special talent. Like probably the only difference would be Buxton probably be closer, like my buddy said, to like 75 range, where there's never really a question he'd be like an elite center fielder defensively. Where Herring, a little lower end on the defense, but he is such an incredible athlete all around. If he's anywhere near what Byron Buxton turned in real life, you'd be pretty happy with that. It's just when you get all those sevens in a profile, it's just pretty exciting. So I wouldn't bet against Pittsburgh with how they develop outfielders. Pretty exciting combination there. Next up, it'll take me a second to spell this name. We have the Japanese shortstop Sumiaki Nabiashi going to Nashville, which is really interesting. This is a really top notch defensive shortstop. I love the like how I picked a shortstop there. The shortstop's going early there because you just gotta lock these guys up because they don't last too long in the draft, especially a guy with a 75 arm. Pretty exciting. Not much power to speak of. Probably the first guy in the draft that has under 45 power, but he again. When you're a shortstop, you don't really need power if you can just make a bunch of contact and have pretty good gap power. A lot to like about that profile. Not to the crazy ceiling um, some of these other guys, but again, like I mentioned with my guy there, pretty safe pick at shortstop, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, he's a shortstop, 70 range, 75 arm, and yeah, I think that's should be a pretty good defensive shortstop right there. Like you said, he's probably the lowest upside bat we've seen so far by a pretty wide margin. Um, I don't have anything. Only gap powers above 50 potential. Um, but the defense gives him a pretty high, a decent floor. As potentially a 2-war player, even if he's not going to be a guy who really wows you offensively.
Yeah, and I love that low greed and only a $250,000 bonus demand. So it'll be
Yeah,
interesting to see if he's the cheapest guy to go in this first round, which would help Nashville and kind of go over
and,
slot later in the draft.
yeah, and I'll be honest, I didn't even realize that Japanese guys were eligible for the draft.
Yeah, I honestly
Um,
don't think they normally are. I think it must have gotten changed by the update in the game without the NPB or something. I was wondering that too. It says he's not. It's not even like he's Japanese heritage, but from U.S. It says he's right from
yeah,
Hiroshima.
Tokyo University.
So yeah, I don't know what the deal is with that. I'll have to do some digging into that after and see if there's any other guys
Mhm.
like this. But I remember thinking that I didn't. I should have looked into it a little more. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. The Tigers come up next, and they go exact opposite end of the spectrum from the safe college shortstop. They go, or actually, was that guy college? I don't remember. Yeah, he was. And
Yes, it was.
they go to the opposite end of the spectrum and pick the crazy ceiling high school bat. Clemens' profile is pretty fascinating. Another profile with a lot of sevens here.
Yeah, I mean, Detroit taking a guy from Cleveland. I was sticking it in the Guardians crawl a little bit, but the Spiders crawl, I should say. Um, yeah, 80 contact, 70 power, 55 high. I mean, it's just another one of these profiles that's a top 5 pick in the past for us, and he's going at what 2024 overall. I mean, there's really good upside bat. Obviously limited to first base given his defensive liabilities. No, pretty much no range, no speed. Um, but it's a huge bat that is going to anchor basically be your cleanup hitter for the next decade if it works out. That said, he is a high school guy. He does have the high work ethic, which is always good from the high school guys. And but yeah, there's always some risk to taking a high school bat who's a first base only. But there's some really good upside here.
Yeah, I think there's a few different like kind of like you know I guess like rules or guidelines I kind of go by personally myself. And I've talked about my strategy earlier here. Like I like kind of with this dynasty, like I've obviously with your payrolls and stuff, you go different strategies depending. But I like to do the safe route. But there's kind of like a rule of thumb where you should probably like give a pretty good look to anyone that has like 70 contact, 70 power. When they're that monstrous of a bat, even if it's like something you wouldn't normally do, like draft a DH or left fielder or first base in the first round. It's just to the point where if the bat's that good, it really doesn't matter where they play on defense. If you have a guy like David Ortiz, like offensively, and he's one of those guys that might make a bunch of teams look pretty silly for passing on him, like 20 multiple over 20 teams passed on this guy. If he turns out anywhere close to what those ceilings are, we might be like, what were we thinking? Like it's not just the 80
Yeah,
and the 70, it's the currents are so high. Like a high school bat with 35 in both is incredible. So yeah, if that's risky to take a first baseman, like you said, but it's just yeah, that upside is pretty tantalizing.
yeah. I know we were talking about it. How we were looking at this draft and going, there's these teams in the 20s, these FTD blue bloods that are going to be getting these high upside bats that are just going to add to their plethora of just insane talent.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me one bit. This guy's hitting cleanup for them in like 5 years and knocking in 130 ribbies a year or something crazy. Next up, we have I was struggling on that spelling there for a second. Ilpo Stromberg is from Houston, Texas, but has like kind of like a name that sounds like it's from Sweden or something. The guy has 80 gap power, 75 speed. See a few blue here. Really interesting profile. It's kind of like all over the place. Not your traditional guy. Doesn't look like an elite defender at third, or maybe not even like good, but has a lot to like about that profile. He's super athletic, ton of gap power. Should be a guy to, if he does become like a good major league player, to really threaten for like a league leader in triples with that speed and gap power combination. Some interesting things. Pretty safe too. A lot of high currents here.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of it's similar to what Chris Williams was when we were looking at him earlier. Just big contact, big gap power, good eye. I mean, he's not as high as Chris Williams, but defensively, yeah, he's got the big arm, but I don't think he has the range to really play third base at a good enough level to make him really worth playing the field. So he might end up just being a first baseman or a DH. But it's another really good offensive profile. 70 contact, as I said, 80 gap power. That's already almost maxed out for me. Where the currents are really high, and he's got that big time speed. So it's at 25th overall, it's a really good upside bat to get here.
Yeah, I absolutely love that comparison you just made. I didn't cross my mind the Chris Williams one, but I think you hit the nail right in the head there. It's perfect comparison because there's so few guys. I noticed a trend out of the park seems to have the last few years is they have a ton of guys. Once you get in the future, the made up regen guys, they have a ton of guys that have the really high contact and high gap, and then very low eye and home run power. It seems like there's way like a 10-to-1 ratio of guys with high, like I said, high contact gap, and then the low compared to the other way around, guys with like 70 eyes, only like 40 contact. So it's pretty rare to get a guy that has the really high contact but also has the eye because the game just really doesn't generate too many players like that unless they're like his first baseman or something. So it's really interesting to see the eyes actually really good with the high contact. So it's nice. Like that's why I love that comparison so much because Chris Williams is one of those rare guys too. Two of those guys from this draft that have the combination of those two. So it'd be interesting, kind of like an on-base machine. So kind of makes up for a little bit of a
Yeah.
lack of defense there for sure. Next up, we have Danny Peterson. This is a high upside arm with the 75 slider, one of the best pitches in the class. Kind of the same profile we talked about with some of these other high school arms. Just a really, really high ceiling with the really high potential ratings and the low currents. So it's just another one of those guys. Kind of repeat myself that you just throw in the system and hope 5 years later he's anywhere close to those potentials. A lot of stuff to like though with the high work ethic and no real big red flags about that profile. Has a good third pitch, 55 overall, high work ethic. lot of stuff to like for me.
Yeah, so for me, the really good control, 70 control, 55 stuff, 55 movement. Those basic pitch ratings are really good. But my issue is for my scout, he's got the 65 fastball, 70 slider, but the changeup's only a 45. And to me, that becomes a borderline starting pitcher to me. Maybe, so there's definitely, this becomes a reliever. And it's a high end reliever, but I think unless that 45, 50 gap is a big difference to me in whether or not someone can be a starter. So we'll see where it goes in the future. You seem to have him at a 50 changeup. So
Yeah,
if that's the case, then it's a little better pick for me.
yeah, it's really interesting. Our scouts seem very different on him, and the OSA is pretty different too. So we're all over the map. The OSA has the 50
Yeah.
changeup, and my scout has 65 stuff on him, and so that's 10 higher than your scout from the sounds of it.
Well,
But I only
yeah.
had 65 control, so yeah, really difference of opinion there, which is really cool. I like to see that because I think from what I've gathered in the game, talking to other people, it seems like a lot of the scouts are pretty similar a lot of the time. So really, be really interesting to see which scout is a little more accurate with him. But like you said, there's always like some reliever risk when you have those high school guys with the third pitch changeup. But be interesting to see. You do like a lot about the upside there for a late first round pick. If he turns into what he looks like he could be pretty solid there. Next up, we have Brandon Garrison going to the Dodgers. I really grew to like this pick at the start. I wasn't sure, and the more I looked at this profile, the more I began to like it. I just found there wasn't too many big weaknesses, and the eye really stands out to me. 40-55 doesn't jump off the page when you're looking at these other first round picks, at least 70 tools, but it's very rare to have a 40-55 eye. I actually did some research on that, and that current being that high is pretty special. So really good defender, really good athlete. A lot of stuff to like here.
Yeah, that eye discipline usually tends to lag behind everything else. I feel like in these high school guys, in most guys. Um, but yeah, I mean, 60. I am 60 contact, 60 eye, 65 gap power. Kind of looks like just a typical second baseman who, can hit a little bit. Can hit. Will play an adequate second base, and has high work ethic. So there's potential for him to, really meet those potentials and become, not necessarily top tier second baseman, but a guy you can definitely rely on and be like a 2.5 to 3 WAR player for you.
Yeah, especially a good fit on like a really good team like the Dodgers, where I like them going the college route instead of the high school route when you have so many competitive years ahead of you with all those young, talented players they have, like Vasquez and Booth. There, probably two of the top 10 players in the league, and they're both under 30 years old. So clearly, like the Dodgers can be a force to be reckoned with for the next like decade or so, or almost, or half decade at least. So you'd think it's nice to see them add a guy that could be a part of that window with those guys still in their primes instead of taking an 18-year-old. So I like that route going with the developed college guy there. I like the system he's built there for sure. Next up, we have the maybe best defender in the draft. Frederman Rubio has a really cool profile, and I know we've said this a bunch of times, not to get too repetitive, but another guy you'd think in most drafts would go a lot higher. When you have a center fielder with this much athleticism, this much base stealing potential, that much advanced contact, you'd think this guy would normally be in your top 10 or 12 picks for sure. Guys like this just don't normally fall out of the top 25. And a pretty amazing offensive profile with or defensive profile. Sorry.
Yeah, and the offense is pretty good given that he's, basically a 70 to 75 center fielder. Um, I have at 55 contact, 55 avoid K, so he'll hit for a decent average with 70 gap power and 75 speed. So there's probably a lot of doubles and triples in that bat, even if the home run power and the eye aren't great. And whatever he lacks offensively, like you said, he's probably the best defensive player in this class. One of the few guys who's a true, 70, 75 plus defender in center field, or even at any career position. Um, so yeah, I really like this pick down all the way at 28 overall for the Red Sox, who I know they drafted probably the best defensive center fielder in the class last year in Aragon before trading him. So it's interesting that they went that route back to back years. Could just be who fell to them, but it could be that they're trying to build a really good defensive outfield there.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool fit. I know Gamma seems to value defense pretty high, so I think you're right on that. Where he's kind of building it that way. Pretty cool player. I really just like a lot about that profile. Pretty much the only weakness is the eye, but it doesn't really matter. If you make a bunch of contact and you're really fast, you don't necessarily need a big eye, and you're never gonna have the perfect prospect. But like the UCLA guy too, always producing pretty good players. Nice fit there in Boston. Next up, we have Josh Lewis. And a lot of the same reasons that I just was ranting about before. Pretty much the same thing applies here with the advanced college guy being a nice fit on a playoff team. The Dodgers getting two really nice college bats here back to back. I guess they didn't sign their first rounder last year, so they get the extra pick here. The Snake, pretty cool nickname too, stands out to me. But a pretty big bat for a catcher, kind of like a Stanko without the high ability.
Yeah, and the currents are pretty good too. There's a 45 current, 70 potential contact, 35 current, 65 potential home run power. So it's a pretty advanced bat with high work ethic. From a guy who, maybe not a great catcher, only has 50 catching ability, but should be able to stick behind the plate. It's just a really, it's a bat you're not going to find a lot behind the plate. And there aren't that many great hitting catchers. So if he's got potential, it looks like he's well on his way given where he is currently. It's a really good pick in the late, this late in the first round.
Yeah, it's probably a top 7 or 8 bat in the entire draft offensively, even if he has to play DH first base. It's just so advanced and so much juice behind that bat, so much gap power and home run.
Yeah.
You'd have to think that even if that guy can just give you 30 or 40 games behind the plate and spend most time as DH, kind of like an Alejandro Kirk in real life, where he's just such an amazing batted catcher, it's still really valuable. So I'd imagine he hits righties really hard looking at his stats. Yeah, a pretty big righty masher. So love how the Dodgers got two college guys that have crazy low bonus demands. I think it was 250 there for Garrison, or pretty low there, and then 410,000 for Lewis. So pretty cool to be able to sign 2 first-round picks for like a third of the price of a top 10 pick. I was thinking of the I can't think of the name. It's on the tip of my tongue. I was thinking a nice comparison for offense profile like that with kind of like a 50 defense and arm rating would be that catcher that was on Detroit for all those years. Just went to Atlanta this offseason. Patrick something. I'm forgetting his name right now.
Patrick Bailey?
Yeah, kind of like a little similar profile to Patrick Bailey. This comparison I was kind of thinking of for that. All right, next up we have Tim Rossi. Do you want to talk about this? Pittsburgh snagging the. Oh, you know what? I think we're actually going to end the episode there. We're not going to get into these compensation picks. I want to talk about these players, but
Chad Stalker.
Sorry?
We're up at pick 30, Chad Stalker.
Oh, did I skip it? Okay, good. I was going to say I thought there was a few teams left, and then I looked again, and I just somehow went way down the list there. My screen kind of changed on me. So, yeah, so you're right. Sorry about that. So, Chad Stalker, this is another first base and probably about like the 10th bat that's just been ridiculous. This guy kind of has the inverse of everybody else. A lot of those other bats have had 80 contact and 60 power. This is the opposite, and probably the more valuable 60 contact, 80 power. A lot like the Detroit first baseman that went a couple picks earlier, but a little less developed and a little more high-end power ceiling. What do you think about those two as a kind of an interesting comparison?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely an interesting guy. I mean, we're looking at like another first base type. But yeah, 60 contact, 80 home run power. The currents are right now are pretty low, given that he's a high school guy, and he's a bat first guy, so there's a little worry there. But a durable player, $1.4 million demand, is pretty low risk for a guy of this potential. You do like to have that he's high leader. He's a guy you get in the clubhouse and really helps out there. But I mean, yeah, this is probably the biggest home run power you're going to see in this draft if he hits that potential.
Yeah, once you start getting into the 70, 75, and 80 power, even if the rest profile is like 40s, that's still just high end because the power is the most valuable thing of an offense profile, in my opinion. So this guy even gets to 65, 70 power, even if the rest of that stuff just like you see Chris Burns and some of those guys with like the 40 hit tools and they're getting 60 home runs. So this guy just comes up and he's an incredible fit. That's probably one of my favorite fits in the entire draft is him going to Philly where the right-handed power is juiced, an absolute match made in heaven. So it honestly, there's part of me that thinks this guy could hit 75 home runs one day because it just develops and he gets 75 power in that ballpark. It's game over. And the 60i is really nice too. I was kind of focused on those low currents, but when you look at the ceiling, this 80 power 60i is such a rare combination. That's Bryce Ball, another guy that played in Philly there with the really high power and really high eye combination. So if you just become anywhere close to a hitter of his ceilings, you'd be kind of like an impact of something like those guys. So pretty nice to get at the end of the first round.
Just following the footsteps of Chris Burns and Roman Palmieri there in Philly right now.
Yeah,
absolute national first baseman.
That'd be cool if those guys are still around when this guy was ready one day. 4 or 5 years, we'll see. Next up, we have another first baseman going to the Cleveland Spiders. Brad, this guy is super developed. What can you tell me about Brad Hancock?
Yeah, probably the most developed bat in the class right now. I already have him at 55 contact, 45 home run power, 40 I, with potential for 80, 60, and 60 in those three categories. I mean, it's just an elite. It's a really good first base bat. Like you said, another one is the inverse of Chad Stalker, where he's got the high contact and only 60 home run power. But it's a guy who's probably going to be able to start in like A or high A or even double A. I think you could probably just put him in double A now and he's going to rake. He'll probably be in the majors in maybe a year or two. It might not even take that before he's hitting in Cleveland. So it's a pretty safe college first base bat that is going to make an impact pretty soon.
Yeah, and Cleveland already has a really deep system, even though they've been good for so long. Some really good drafting and trades there. Still have one of the deepest systems in the league. A lot of talent coming up that's getting ready to replace some of those old guys they've had around for a long time, like Bellinger and Lux particularly. So a couple guys, college guys that can kind of jumpstart that system, should have some openings there at those key spots. Hancock is another guy that has a really low demand, 650K. It's a guy that should sign pretty easily, and pretty nice amount of college guys here with their really low demands, which makes sense. But Stanford guy, Cali guy, so just a really big bat. And it's really interesting to me. I guess I wasn't really. That's why I like doing these videos. You kind of get a different perspective. I didn't really notice how many first basemen were going when the draft was happening. Now that we're slowing down and looking at these picks one by one, was that 5 first basemen or something? And all pretty similar. It's just obviously they
Yeah,
all have the big bats, but and all have kind of no one had like the 70 avoid K. They all seem to kind of have that high contact, pretty good power. The main difference is a couple of those guys had
yeah.
like the real big power, but Hancock, a lot of those guys are like the 80-60 combination. But yeah, a lot of big bats going in that first round. Next up, we have the last pick of third last pick of the first round of the ones we're doing here. The Rockies took Kevin Davis. I don't even remember this actually. I'll have to double check when I see this profile. That's right. Okay, so high school big bat yet again. The amount of guys that have 70 contact, 60 power in this draft are just disgusting. This is another guy that's probably a third first baseman, so that might be like our sixth first baseman here in the last like 15, 20 picks. Is there anything that stands out about that profile in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, 75 contact, 70 gap power, 65 home run power. Uh, Putting that in Coors Field is just going to be just insane. I mean, this is the guy who could hit like 50 doubles and 30 home runs a year, and 40 home runs a year. I mean, this is going to be a guy with 100 extra base hits playing in Coors Field. Like you said, he's a first base only DH type. Coming out of high school, he's already at 35 contact and 35 gap, which is nice. But yeah, it really is just a battle league profile that will probably play up given the environment he's going to.
Yeah, and one thing that stands out to me about this profile is the low demand. We've had a lot of low demand guys talked about this episode, but they're
Mm-hmm.
pretty much all college guys. So this guy's a high school guy with that low demand. So pretty nice
Yeah.
deal as those high school guys usually want in the couple millions there, especially the big bat ones like that. But and the other good thing is we did mention that like he's another first baseman, but by far probably the best defender of all these first basemen, where a lot of those guys were
Mm-hmm.
35, 45 or 40 range, 35 air. This guy is almost able to play third base, so he's like pretty much like a
Yeah.
borderline gold glove type first baseman when you have the 40 range and the 55 are a lot of like the way higher than your traditional first baseman. So guy like probably it doesn't show on my ratings page here. He hasn't played first base yet. But probably gets like a 60 first baseman, 55, 60. So definitely helps too with a good team just having a little bit more defense at those key spots. But yeah, just yet again another big bat going in this draft, and another one coming up here. Jerry Gregson is a outfielder that went to Tampa Bay. A guy that looks like he could play some left field there. Another juicy bat.
Yeah, high school senior coming from New York, New York. He's 19 years old, so he's probably one of the older high school guys in his class also. But another guy that only has $700,000 demand. So it's pretty low risk given the money. and he's pretty well advanced. He's already got 35 contact, 35 per one power, according to my scout, with potential for 80 and 60 in the two. Little low I, but for the 33rd pick overall, this is a really good profile. Probably at best, you know, mediocre left fielder. But another guy where the bat should play kind of wherever you put him.
Yeah, could actually play a really high level first base too. It's 6'5" with 50 range, so left field, first base. Yeah, you love to see those 35 currents out of a high school guy with the contact and power there. Just it like we talked about with the center fielders. The same thing applies to these all these first base left fielder types. It's going to be fascinating to see out of pretty much like the now we're up to probably 7, 8, or 9 of these guys. They're all similar profiles, so kind of like the 75, 80 contact, 60 power, all these things. Same thing applies. It's just fascinating to see which one of these guys turns out best. I just love that when there's like a big run on a position in a draft class. Next up, we have Nate Wood going to the Brewers. This guy's profile is very different than pretty much everyone we've had go in this first round so far. So really interesting profile here with a lot of a lot of 80s here on my screen.
Yeah, I mean, this is it might be one of my favorite profiles in the draft. Because I think it's like if you look at guys now, it's Luis Arise, a guy who's just going to hit like 370. I mean, 80 contact, 80 gap power, 75 avoid Ks with 80 speed. It's just a crazy profile. It's like I said, it's a it's Tony Gwynn. It's a 370, 380 type of hitter. And the eye at 45 is still okay given the profile. And he could profile as, an elite a really good left field, a solid right fielder. That just hits the top of your lineup for the next 10 years. And the currents are already 40 contact and 40 void Ks. So this is a pretty safe guy for a high school pick who's only 17. Or she's 34th overall.
Jeez. Yeah, I forgot. I kind of forgot about this guy. I hadn't really looked at his profile too much since the draft. I forgot how high end some of the stuff was. 55, 80 gap power is just incredible for a guy that is going to sign and be 17 years old when he's taking his first at bats in rookie ball in a month here. He's not going to turn 18 kind of till the end of the year there in middle of September. So pretty much get a whole rookie ball season at 17 with that kind of currents is just really special. Like the very rare guy like that has that kind of bat on ball skills when they're so young. So it's just a really cool player to watch for sure. Next overall, we have. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, it feels like the guy kind of slipped through because those like OPS ratings are just so low, but everything else is just so crazy high.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to pass on a guy with like 65 power and like 70 contact, all those guys that went. So I could see why that happened, but like same thing you said, it's interesting. It seems like he slipped though because that profile just seems that it seems pretty fascinating. I actually have 65 outfield range on him, so which is actually a pretty good decent chance. A lot of times 17, 18-year-olds go up 5 range or something. It wouldn't shock me if this guy got 70 range. So if he could do that, holy smokes, look out if he can play a high level center field with that bat. Next up, we have Josh Weir going to the World Series champ Montreal Expos. Josh Weir here is a college guy, another one of those kind of nice low bonus college guys going to Montreal. Pretty safe profile, just kind of not quite as high end as a guy like Nanny or Moss that went at the top of the first round with a 70 range, just a little lower defensively, but really similar bat to those guys, and yet another high level center fielder here.
Yeah, I mean, it's another guy who's pretty well developed. I have 40, 65 contact and 30, 55 home run power with the gap power almost maxed out at 70. And a 35, 60 I. So it's a really good, really safe college profile. And I think the high work with the 65 range, you could probably get away with him in center field. Even though he might, I think in all likelihood he ends up being a really good corner outfielder.
Yeah, it's a really similar profile to their left fielder, Mitch Drew, where he's just got the really high contact and both kind of fringy center field, really high level left fielders. So it'd be really interesting to see. And Drew's really young, so they're actually really close in age. So it wouldn't surprise me one bit to see Drew, Tony Guerra, and Weir all together in that outfield for a long time in Montreal if all things go well with Weir. So really, really, really nice. Another big lefty bat for that Montreal team who has a bunch and pretty crazy splits. He should kill righties. 70 gap power versus righties and 50 versus lefties. So pretty big split guy there who should just crush it. So if you could platoon him maybe with like a high range righty bat there, that'd be really cool. But yeah, a real nice pick there to go at that late in the draft with that high ratings with the kind of ceiling he has with his bat to be able to play the middle of the field. Pretty special. So that caps off our first round of a ridiculously loaded draft class, and that was a blast going over all those guys and just seeing all that high level talent. Anything you want to add on, or?
No, I mean this is it's just a crazy draft. Like I could go into the second round and we're still finding guys who would be like top 10 picks in most drafts. So this was a really fun one to look at and definitely had fun reading through some of these profiles.
Yeah, it's just can't wait to shortlist some of these guys and just check up on them every few months here, especially once you get some of those crazy rating guys jump into rookie ball and A ball, see the kind of damage they're going to be doing. So that's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us, man, and we'll see you guys later.